Today, what I would like to demonstrate is the use of a remote desktop application called RealVNC. VNC is a generic term for remote administration tool that can be used by many different companies since it's open source. Some people, if you use the Apple computers, may be familiar with Apple Remote Desktop. RealVNC is probably the biggest well-known and used VNC application. They've had a very long run. They've been going for a very long time, which means their support base is very large and they have many features, and it's a very mature product. By visiting the RealVNC website, you can download a trial to test out to make sure that it's going to be useful for what you intend. It is cross-platform. Even if you do pay for a paid version to get more features for the program, it's relatively inexpensive, on par, if not cheaper, than Apple Remote Desktop. However, it's not as free like Windows Remote Desktop, but it is very affordable, even for schools. When you click on download, you will be given an automatic choice with the green highlight for the version that you may need for your system. Once again, it's a cross-platform, so it works on all devices, which is really nice. Something to consider is that just as with Apple Remote Desktop, you will have to load the client, which is actually the opposite of what we traditionally think, because the client on the client computer will actually be the server, because each student will need to run a server on their computer, which will automatically start up when they turn on their computer. I'll go through the settings for that in a moment. Once we have the application downloaded, which I already have it pre-installed, so I can just go ahead and skip to it. There are, once again, two applications. There is, let me go ahead and bring it up. There is the server and the viewer. If I go to RealVNC, you can notice them here. I have the server software, which is what you will install on the student computers. And then you have the viewer, which is what you will use as a teacher or administrator to view the other computers. Once again, it's usually common courtesy that if you're going to use a remote application, that you notify any other faculty or staff that you're logged in. That's a good protocol to have. It's not necessary with students. If you have the students sign a AUP or an RUP, an acceptable use policy, typically that is signed in the student handbook where the parents and the students agree to that. If you don't have that, I'd recommend that you encourage that your school adopt one of those policies. Now, if I go ahead to the server, which is what the students will initially start up and load on their computers, when you start it, you automatically are prompted with this screen here, which gives you the IP address squarely in the middle. Now, there is a problem if you're going to run VNC on an Apple environment, because and if you have Apple Remote Desktop installed, because they both use the same port. So what our school did to compensate for this is we just incremented the port by 1. And I can show you that once I log into the server. Once the server is running, you can access it either on a Mac by the top toolbar, or in a Windows computer, you can go to the system tray and access it down here. If you right-click on it, on Apple or Mac, you can go to Options, and it should open up the main options screen. There are 3 settings in particular that you may want to consider. The first is on security, which is the default startup tab. We always change it to VNC password. This way we give it a unique password that is not associated with the computer at all. This way students can't change any of the settings. we usually add a new user, and we make it an administrative, not normal permissions. This will allow the tech department to have access to all the features of VNC, which you may not use, but it's good to have. And I won't go into those right now, but also it prevents the student from changing any of the settings. The third setting that we're going to want is the port. Once again, I had mentioned up here in the upper right-hand corner where it says port, the default port is 5,900. The problem with that is that Apple Remote Desktop uses that. So if you have a mixed environment or a cross-platform environment with Apple computers, you will need to increment this by 1. I just by default go ahead and set that up for Windows and Mac computers. Really, the other settings are you don't have to worry about. If you change the top one, which is the VNC password, as soon as you are finished, it will prompt you for a password right there. But if you change any other setting in the options, it will prompt you for the password once again to confirm, to make sure that you are an authenticated user. This prevents, once again, the students from changing any of the settings. Now, once the server is running, you can go ahead and access by using a VNC viewer. The viewer is a very simplistic interface. It's just this here with an IP number, and you can change the port by adding a colon. If I were to go back, you can add a colon and then whatever the port number is. I incremented it by 1, so you can type in 5,901, or you could just put 1 for a shortcut, and it will accept that. There's no real other options here, but there may be a few that you might be interested in. When you create a connection, and if you modify any of these options, it will remember them, which is really nice. I'm going to show you, however, in the address book in a moment, how you can change the settings and store these in a classroom list, making it easy to access all the computers at once. The thing that I like to do is a custom scaling. This makes it so, and I'll show you in a moment, the student's computer is a tile on the desktop, similar to about this size or smaller. And so I can tile them along my screen so I can see multiple computers at once. A good size that I use is about 300 pixels. I make sure I preserve the aspect ratio. If you want to, however, look at a full screen version with VNC Viewer, I've not been able to do it, to change it on the fly. However, you can always go back in the options and modify this back to no scaling or scale to window size, which will allow you to resize the window so you can see more of the screen and take a snapshot if you need evidence for improper use, for example. Some other options that you might want, enable chat is a good feature to have. That way you can chat with the student if you want to give them a warning or to get them back on task. And that's really about it. That's all you're going to use for the options in Viewer. I'm not going to connect right here. I'm going to show you my address book, which is next. There's one last option I forgot to show you in Server, if I were to go back in there under Options. When you are viewing a computer, sometimes you don't want the student to be able to see that you are viewing them. To do that, you can right here, protect computer, notify when users connect and disconnect. If you uncheck that, they'll not be able to see when you are viewing them. I believe that is all you really need for the server settings. Now, the address book. If I go back to the main folder for RealVNC, you'll notice another application in there called Address Book. The address book is where you can pre-populate all the IP addresses of students so you can quickly access them. This is the address book. You'll notice that I've already pre-populated my address book with students. To create a new user, a new student to monitor their computer, I could always click on New Connection, and I can add in the server address. This is their IP address. It's typically 4 numbers separated by dots. I don't really know of any off the top of my head. I'm just making them up now. If you are going to modify, because you have a mixed environment of Apple and Windows computers, you might have to change the port by 1. And to change this so that the port is pointed to it, you just put a colon and then you put 5,901. So we just increment it by 1, and then that way it'll work. You will set the port in the server options, which I've shown you already. Another note, Apple Remote Desktop, VNC, there's a drawback in that they rely on IP addresses to find computers. This is problematic in that typically schools have so many computers that IP addresses are assigned dynamically. They are not static. They change. Typically, there's something called a time release, or that allows a computer to maintain an IP address over and over again. The timeout for this is usually 3 days or 72 hours. So for example, if students go on vacation for a week for spring break, they may come back and their IP address will be reassigned. This is a problem in that you won't be able to establish the connection using VNC or Apple Remote Desktop any longer. Windows computers or Apple Remote Desktop does not rely on IP addresses, so it always maintains the connection. However, that doesn't work on Apple computers. So for VNC, something to remember is if you can't see a student and you see them using their computer, you can have them come over and you can have them show you or send you their IP address so you can reestablish the connection, which you can always edit just by clicking on one, right-clicking, I should say, and going to Properties. It'll ask you once again for the password for the system, and you can modify the address at that time. Now, the username and password are what you set up when you set up the computer or the server software on the client computer or student computer. And so you can, once again, you can change that here if you'd like. Some of the other settings on the tab, you can change the default scaling, or if you want it to be icon-based, which I'll show you in a moment what mine looks like. You can enable chat if you wish. I usually don't enable that, but it's up to you. And that's really all you're really going to do here. Okay, once I have my address book open, we can go ahead and check if any students are on and see what it looks like. Unfortunately, you can't select multiple students using the Shift key or the Control key, or if you're on a Mac, the Command key to select multiple students at once. That's unfortunate. I might be able to find a solution around that later, or you might be able to. But for now, you could just quickly double click. I can click as many as I want, and I can just go ahead and let them see if they can find any of the students. I suspect that it's lunchtime now. I won't find any students on the network. This is my class. We can see if any students are on. I know I have at least one. When a window is open, this is what you see. You'll notice this is a Mac computer that the student is on. Let's see if there's anyone else on. You can select multiple computers like I've just done. It'll prompt you if it can't find a connection. It's lunchtime, so I suspect not too many students are on. But what I can do while it's logging in is I can view what the student's doing, and I can always take a snapshot. Yeah, so everyone's at lunch. So I have one computer, and I can see what they're doing. If I want to talk with them, in the upper center, there's a pop-up window or navigation bar that shows up, allows me to disconnect, save the connection, close connection. I can change some of the options for the connection right here. If I've enabled chat, it will let me do a chat with the student right here. That's a good option to have, like I say, if you want to give verbal warnings or text warnings, I should say, to the students to get them back on task. And it also gives you information. If you can't, Windows, or I should say Apple computers, in the upper right-hand corner, it gives you the student username. On Windows computer, that doesn't exist. So if you want to find out what connection it is, you could always click on the connection information button, and that'll tell you the user or the computer you're connected to. Really, that's about it for the remote desktop for VNC. I really like it. I've used it at many schools. I know a lot of schools that use it. It's very affordable. It's cross-platform, and it's very mature and very stable. It's a good program to use and easy to implement. It usually just takes a moment to set up your class, to have the students hand over their computer momentarily so you can add the administrative password, and you're basically set. I hope you find this video useful. If you have any questions, you can contact me in the email which may appear at the bottom of the screen. Thank you.